Color correction is such an important part of the post-production process. It's during this process that you need to follow a workflow to achieve best results, starting by correcting individual shots for proper contrast, color balance, and saturation. Then you go through and establish shot-to-shot consistency, making sure that each of the shots within a scene looks like they belong together. And finally, you have the option of stylizing your footage to add a particular look or feel to the scenes in your film. We'll touch on some parts of this workflow in this course, but to go through the entire process, check one of the many color correction courses available on lynda.com. And if you're just starting out, my course, Introduction to Video Color Correction, would be a good place to start. Now, in order to go through the color correction process properly, you need two main things to do it right. First, you need to simply look with your eyes to determine exactly what you need to do. And second, you need a series of video scopes to measure the results. So in this movie, we'll take a look at the first part, where we analyze footage with our eyes. All right? So in order to get an idea of the process, I'm going to take a look at a couple of interview clips from our Greyhound project. We've got Jeannie, and we've got Barbara, and we've got Rebecca. Okay? So you can see that each of these has their own problems. And full disclosure, while the original interviews certainly did need general color correction in their natural state, I have doctored these images up a little bit to give us some more to discuss and to adjust. But it's honestly not uncommon for you to find images like this that need a lot of help. All right, so let's take a look at the shot of Jeannie here. As we go through each of these shots, we immediately should ask ourselves some basic questions. First, what part of the image is supposed to be white and what part is supposed to be black? Well, we've got some white objects here in the background, and while we may not bring them up to full white, they should generally be approaching white. And there isn't too much in the way of true black in this scene, but certainly some of the shadows around her hair and of the dog should be approaching black. Next, how are the brightness and contrast? This image is relatively flat, so there aren't a lot of super bright or super dark values. We're going to need to expand our tonal range, which means that we will need to make our brights brighter and our darks darker. Next, how are the colors? Is there a color cast? Now, I think there's a general warm color cast to this image. We've got a little bit too much yellow-orange going on, so we'll likely need to cool things off a bit. And then finally, how is the saturation level? Well, there's a lot of color in this image, but it's not really coming through the way it should. Our saturation levels are a little on the low side, so we can bump those up and make things a lot more vibrant. All right, great. So I think we have a good idea of where we're going with this shot. Now, let's take the shot of Barbara. We'll ask ourselves these same basic questions. What part of the image is supposed to be white, and what part of the image is supposed to be black? Now, this is a little bit of a tricky question. Clearly, the brightest and whitest part of this image is the window behind her. But this was shot so that the window values would be blown out. We likely won't get this detail back, and that's fine. It was shot that way on purpose. So these values are blown out and can actually rise above a quote-unquote normal white level. And so the lightest part of the image besides the window is probably the side of Barbara's face here and a little bit on the wall. And neither are a true white, but they'll be approaching white when we make our adjustments. And I definitely would say the shadows in her hair closest to her face are the darkest parts of the image. And we'll probably need to darken those values. Right now, they're coming out as a little too gray. Next, how are the brightness and contrast? So this image needs more contrast. We need to make our brighter parts brighter by just a bit, and we need to make our darker parts darker by even more. And then next, how are the colors? Is there a color cast? To me, I think there is a very slight bluish color cast to this image, so probably warming things up will help things out. And then finally, how is the saturation level? So this image, I think, is pretty muted. We'll really need to increase the saturation to make Barbara look healthy and vibrant. All right, and then finally, I'm going to very quickly look at Rebecca, but instead of going through each question, I'm just going to look at it and give a few sentence summary of what I see. So this image is much too dark and dim. The blacks, which are here in the shadows of her hair, are probably fine, but the lightest parts of the image really need to be brought up significantly. The reflection behind her is the lightest part of the image and can act as our white, but we might let it go a little bit above white. But in general, everything is too muddy. We need a lot more contrast. And there is a little bit of a bluish color cast, so we'll likely need to warm everything up a little bit. And we'll need to bump up the saturation. Rebecca's skin looks really gray, and so once we warm it up, we can boost the saturation to give her more vitality. All right, so again, even before we begin measuring the video signal, we already have a jump start on what we need to do. This analysis part of the process will get easier and quicker, and soon you'll be able to perform the analysis in a matter of seconds before you dive into each correction.